All right, welcome to the next edition of the IDP Plus podcast. We've got my host here, Matt Record, and
Hello, hello.
you've got Dynasty Santa, and today we're going to dive right into a pretty hot topic on IDP, sort of top level talk and league settings and setup. So we're going to talk to you today about some true positions and how that affects playing this wonderful game that we love so much. So we're going to jump right in. And we had a question from someone on Twitter that asked, why the heck won't the IDP community support defensive end slash defensive tackle or cornerback slash safety instead of the generic DL and LB? And comes from Fantasy Maestro. He thinks it is maddening. So, Matt, is that maddening for you that the IDP community does not support this? Is that a true statement, even?
I think it is maddening, while also being true. I
Yeah.
think part of the issue with true position, is most of us who are in the IDP space are a bit of, IDP junkies, right? We like to get in the weeds. We like all of the details, and the different positions, which, if we're being honest, the offensive side has had for the entirety of its existence.
Mm.
You see in a follow-up tweet with those of you who are watching on YouTube, thanks for watching us on YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe. That helps the channel. We really appreciate it. But if you're listening to us, thanks for supporting us. But he says it'd be like eliminating tight end on offense and just using
Mm.
receivers because they both do the same thing and they get stats for receiving yards. So why do we limit it on the defensive side? Uh, we know, being in the IDP community for some time now, that it can be daunting to convince people to join the IDP space. So any means of getting IDP into your leagues, we support, and often, I will say I've had to do it in my family leagues and other leagues where, yeah, making it even simpler, just DL,
Mm.
LB, and DB is the way to go. But I think the more mainstream we get, and you best believe it, we're getting more mainstream, we're gaining steam, we are the future. We're
Mm.
gonna have to, by default, have these true positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think it comes down to a few things, right? It depends where you're playing. So Maestro is probably, like a lot of us, split between probably the two most prominent platforms that host IDP are Sleeper and MFL.
Mhm.
Sleeper, you get the larger grouping at defensive line, linebacker, defensive back. So the big three versus MFL offers true position, where you would specifically have to play guys as defensive ends or defensive tackles or cornerbacks or safeties. So that is a huge piece of discussion. Now, some people may have never even heard of either of those platforms, and they play on ESPN. ESPN offers you could do IDP flexes, you can do defensive line, you can do defensive end and defensive tackle, along with they even added edge designation. So they offer probably the most comprehensive differences in the positions where you can kind of lump them together or break them out into quote unquote true position. The only issue it doesn't madden me as much because, like you said, we're sort of trying to help make this game more popular and more accessible for people to play.
Make it
So
mainstream, yeah.
exactly. So, and I think the first step in that is kind of offering an either or type situation. So, I don't think offering just simply defensive line and defensive backs is necessarily a bad thing. Um, Sleeper is becoming a really popular platform, especially with obviously younger people.
Extremely.
It's got the chat built right in. So, if you're trying to bring in people that are not only newer to IDP, but maybe newer to fantasy in general, I think it's a great bridge to then turning them into degenerates like us, heading over to MFL and starting a ridiculously crazy, 53-man league, add some contracts in there and doing quote unquote true position. Um, so I'm kind of torn on this topic. Like, it doesn't bug me quite as much as Maestro here. I don't think, just because, like I said, it makes you. strategize a little bit differently. Now, for sure, it devalues defensive tackles and cornerbacks when you group them together. So I think that's a main statement that needs to be made. If you are playing in a league that groups defensive line and defensive backs together, you're pretty much aiming for defensive ends and edge rushers and safeties who just gobble up tackles, because cornerbacks are super inconsistent. A lot of them rely on their interceptions, passes defended, which are all over the place. It's incredibly difficult to predict that kind of stuff, right? So that's just one thing to be aware of. Is there So when I talk about that, as far as bridging the gap and then focusing on the positions, what's kind of your take on that whole
Yeah, my takes. I don't want to yuck anyone's yum, right?
thing?
It's like
Perfect.
people can enjoy what they want to enjoy,
Yeah.
and hopefully your leagues are in a format that you enjoy, that you like them, right?
Mhm.
I like to treat the generic DLLB DB as sort of the, for lack of a better way, great gateway drug into
Right.
IDP. I found it easy to convince my friends and family last year
Yeah.
from going from a team defense, so you're starting one, right, to you're starting only three, right? So
Hmm.
we truly just did, yeah, you get a DL, you get an LB, you get a
Perfect.
DB.
Was that on Sleeper
It was on
or
ESPN, actually.
ESPN? Okay,
ESPN.
perfect.
We've been playing on ESPN for pert
Perfect.
near 15 years, so
Gotcha.
we're not moving off of that. My 80-year-old grandma's not gonna move off of there. So that is where we are.
Yeah.
But uh, yeah, it is truly that, and that can be enough because that does give you, the person that's advocating for IDP, a little more strategy, right? It enhances it just enough where that is more interesting than just playing with a team defense, in my
Mhm.
opinion.
Agree.
Uh, but but if you want to get into the truly addicting side of things, I do think the true position is where it's at, and I'll tell you why. Uh, First and foremost, you have the specific scoring that you can do for the different positions
Right.
to help balance things out. You sort of mentioned this, Anna. When you have these just DLLB, DB, it gets wildly out of balance based on the actual
Mhm.
positions. And maybe you like that, maybe you don't. I, for one, like to see cornerbacks be relevant in
Right.
IDP. Like, cornerbacks do a very important job. They're one of the
Mhm.
highest paid positions on the defensive side for decent reason, right? They have a
Mhm.
big influence on the actual game. When you're only playing with DB, and for the most part, the default stats, advocate for splash plays and
Right.
tackles. Good cornerbacks don't have a good floor of tackles, right?
Mhm.
There are some exceptions, obviously, but if you were to
Right.
go back and look at the highest scoring cornerbacks, it's the ones that happen to have a bunch of interceptions this year, which you can't
Mhm.
always expect. Interceptions, kind of like sex. Um,
And touchdowns.
Right, and touchdowns,
Yeah.
and tackles, and the cornerbacks that are getting tackles are ones that are letting up receptions, which means
Yes.
they're not actually good at their job, which
Mhm.
which again, they still were there to make the tackle,
Right.
but the it makes things more difficult, to sort of balance. So, I like being able to have similar things like leagues now. It's very commonplace to see tight ends catches being worth
Right.
1.5 versus just the point 0.5 or 1 for wide receivers. I like
Mhm.
the ability of making cornerbacks relevant, more so than safeties, but maybe making cornerbacks, tackles a little higher, and
Mhm.
the good cornerbacks are now being rated higher, or things of that nature. So it just gives you more flexibility. It makes it a little more balanced. And if you are looking for help trying to figure out those scoring settings, please reach out. We'll be happy to help you out with
Yes.
that. But yeah, it just makes the game even, you know, even more flavorful. There's more stuff you can do with it.
Right, right, exactly. That brings me to a good point too about what you're talking about cornerbacks. I've seen a lot of people, be hesitant to play IDP because they think the bad players are the ones who rack up all the stats. So your bad football players are getting the most fantasy points because they're getting picked on. While that's true with cornerbacks, I hate that argument because you've got plenty of quote unquote bad players
Oh yeah.
in on the offensive side who either, these specialty running backs who aren't good enough to handle 200 carries a season, who have to be the pass catching running backs. Are they overall good? No, they're special in one particular skill set, and that's all
Mhm.
they really bring to the table. So I don't like that comparison a lot. You see plenty, and even just coaching decisions, right? We have players that we know are better, and the coach will put in the backup running back to score a touchdown on the 1 yard line. Why? Doesn't make any sense, right? So bad players get fantasy points all the time on the offensive side. So I do, as a sort of side tangent, I hate people. If your only argument to me is, well, the bad football players score all the points, it happens on offense just as much, and it's usually only occurring with cornerbacks, right? I mean, bad defensive linemen aren't usually racking up double-digit sacks every year. So
Right. Yeah, maybe the better example is, like, I like making defensive tackles relevant.
yeah,
Like defensive tackles, good defensive tackles don't rack up many points
right.
in your standard settings, right?
Mhm,
So any defensive tackle, that's especially ones that are generating sacks, right?
mhm,
But even by getting tackled, it's nice to give them the benefit of scoring, fantasy points, such that, yeah,
mhm,
you will actually think about grabbing I don't know, Dexter Lawrence, right?
right.
As you know, a viable fantasy asset over, I don't know, the defensive end 15, right?
Mhm,
Obviously the edge rushers are still,
mhm,
going to be more valuable just by their upside. But like, it's nice to all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we have to care about defensive tackles now, right?
mhm.
And the same thing with cornerbacks.
Yeah, for sure. I want those positions to be relevant. So that's where a site like MFL, my fantasy league, does give you the option to score those positions individually. So you could make a cornerback tackle worth 3, while a linebacker tackle might be worth 1, and a defensive tackle worth 3, or whatever you want to assign to it. And what I like about that is you play around, input different things, set it, and then go look at last year's standings and see how things work out, from a balance perspective, and just tweak it from there. That's another big thing in our industry, right? Is scoring and standardized scoring, and whether there needs to be one or not. I flip flop on that. There's some really good systems out there, at least to build upon. IDP 123 seems to be one of the most popular, and I do love that, especially from a starting position. Um, I believe it is the default on Sleeper, which is really great for people to get involved to. But then, MFL can be. I've tried to set up leagues in MFL, and I give up because it's
It's a lot.
daunting and very
It's a lot.
difficult. Yeah. So and I get that. So again, that is for, people that play IDP that are super into it. You've probably been playing fantasy football and possibly IDP fantasy football for many, many, many years. And I get it. You like what you like and go for that. But we also don't you want more people to start playing? So there's some give and take there, I think, to be open to all this. My other gripe with true position is all these edge rushers that are in the league, right? That's a big point of contention. Are they defensive ends? Are they linebackers? What do you do with them in true position? Now, there's a lot of really smart people out there to listen to on this topic, where if it's kind of an in between guy, make them defensive ends. Your league will be so much more fun not having these plethora of edge
Mhm.
rushers set to being a linebacker. It creates scarcity at the linebacker position, and it allows you to use the edge rushers as defensive ends for the most part, and kind of create depth in what, if you kind of flip flop that, defensive line and defensive ends now become extremely scarce, and linebackers, which are already kind of deep to begin with, even the true just tackler middle linebacker guys, now are just oversaturated. and those edge rushers sort of lose their value to a certain extent, being classified as just linebackers. But that's a little bit of a grief that I have with the true position, because now you're sort of opening this up to subjectivity and what people think are these positions. And anyone that wants to go to depth charts, throw those out the window.
Mhm.
Most depth charts are done by marketing people for the football team, or are that particular website's best guess at what they think a player is going to be. So we're seeing more and more these days, the traditional 4-3 or 3-4 is becoming less and less of a thing, because teams are using both. They're maximizing their players' talents, and they're flip-flopping all around. There's nickel packages that there's no, like, you're not trotting out the same 4 defensive linemen on the front and 3 linebackers in the middle. There's so much fluidity within these defensive schemes and packages nowadays that it's really hard to nail them down. And these kind of tweener players, the Hassan Reddicks of the world, the TJ Watts of the world, are assigning them a true position is incredibly difficult these days. So that's just another thing I want to get off my chest when we're
Mhm.
talking about this topic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, take, for example, and we talked about him at a decent length, last episode, Micah Parsons, right? I know in my big IDP league, it's been a whole thing of contention his entire career if he's gonna be classified as a linebacker or defensive end. Because in our league, we have different scoring, right? So if he's classified as a defensive end, his points actually go up because the defensive end's expected to have fewer tackles, right? And
Right.
rely mostly on sacks, which, as we sort of talked about, he has decent enough sacks every year to be decent. And, maybe I'll say average to maybe above average, tackle numbers. So it's like,
Right.
where's he being lined up? And it's like, oh, well, he was his rookie year. It was, I'm going to make up a number, to be honest, like 65% of the time
Yeah.
on the edge. And this last year, I think it was something like 80,
Yeah.
85% on the edge. It's like, when does he go from a linebacker to a defensive
hmm
end?
And there's
Right.
way more and more of these guys coming in this year. Will
Think,
Anderson, we have this exact same
mhm.
problem. What is he? We don't even know. So how do you do rookies coming into the
And it's
league?
not even
So
just that position too. I think
mhm.
Isaiah Simmons
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
Cardinals,
hmm
all of a sudden he was a linebacker forever in
right,
MFL, and was not a good linebacker by any stretch of the imagination, and then became a safety where
right,
points were just a little bit higher. All of a sudden, he's a top 20 guy, which
uh-huh,
which which is nuts. Like, it's crazy,
correct.
especially because that can change every year. So a lot of people listening to this right now are either our family or they're dynasty players, right? Because you're listening to this in June. So when you're a
Right.
dynasty player, you're investing in someone for their career, right? Or at
hmm
least, or if you're in a contract year, years. So
hmm
you want to know how they're going to be scored, and that can drastically change your build. Sometimes for the better, right? Like
hmm
you drafted Isaiah Simmons as that linebacker draft in the first round. Oh, he kind of was terrible. Oh, but now he's great again, right?
hmm
Or for the worse, right? So that it's the downside, but you get the additional flexibility, and you like to think,
Right.
like you said, Santa, that the people that are making these decisions for what people are classified as know what they're doing, and they're getting it right from a football standpoint, because
hmm
what we're trying to do is simulate real football as best as we can, and people's value. That's the whole thing with fantasy football. But it's I think because it brings out the passion in us and gets us excited, that's why we like it so much, and that's why we
hmm
prefer it versus the, like, oh yeah, the easy
Exactly.
way out is just, putting people in 3 categories. I always like to think, like, if I'm getting upset about something, that means I probably
Yeah.
really like it a lot.
Oh, I could talk about this stuff. I mean, this is probably going to end up being a shorter episode for us, but I mean, I could go on forever about this. So, yes, you've got the tweener guys, right? Like you mentioned, Isaiah Simmons. Jeremy Chin has
Oh.
linebacker and
Ooh.
safety eligibility in leagues. And these guys are more and more and more. I think Kyle Hamilton this year could have a good chance at, kind of bordering that
Sure.
dual eligibility. If these safeties a lot of these coaches are playing three safety looks, and the one that's playing more towards the line of scrimmage, is he going to get linebacker classification? So there's no perfect system here when talking about true position versus we'll call it the big three: the defensive line, linebacker, defensive back. I don't think both have faults and flaws, and both are fun. So that's what you just kind of got to curate your league to the players that are playing. If you got newer people trying it out, or giving it a shot for the first time, I would lean towards the big three. Versus if you find degenerates like us that are all in for this stuff, yeah, we're probably going to prefer quote unquote true position. But we had a big thing with MFL these past 2 years. Our guy Gary Davenport works with them on position eligibility. He was super frustrated last season because you had a huge shift in edge players getting moved to linebackers. So a guy like Max Crosby, who has his fingers in the dirt on 100% of snaps, became a linebacker. So,
Ridiculous.
like you said, dynasty players, crazy people listening to this like us right now, we're super frustrated with it. You draft a guy in dynasty as a defensive end, and then somebody flicks their fingers and he's now a linebacker. What am I supposed to do? What if he was my only defensive end that I was counting on? Now I have to go trade and maybe trade him away. And now he's back this year, back as a defensive end, because thankfully the people in MFL listen to the brain of Gary and said, this is ridiculous. We can't be doing this kind of stuff to people. So now you've got this fluctuating, potentially year to year position changes. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Quick going back to the depth chart thing too. Do you think NFL coaches are worried about providing websites and media people, while Isaiah Simmons really should be listed as a linebacker? They don't care. They're going to put him in the position to maximize his talent, hopefully. And they don't really give a crap where that ends up being on the field. And do you really think that is a priority in the slightest bit to provide that information to anyone outside of the organization, especially in the terms of playing fantasy football? So that's something that really bugs me in group chats and things like that. I just joined a couple new leagues doing like contract stuff like that, and people are going back and forth about Harold Landry recently was a big one because
Sure.
he missed basically all of last year. The prior year, he was listed as a defensive end. His manager is upset because now he's being listed as a linebacker. He's trying to get some guidance, yes, in June, because he might have to make some decisions here on what's going on with Harold Landry. So now you've got this year-to-year fluctuation, very frustrating. Do you think who's Vrabel is concerned about providing accurate depth chart information about Harold Landry? I think anybody using depth chart as an argument for their true position really needs to take a look in the mirror and use some critical thinking about where the sources of these depth charts are coming from. I think that's a ridiculous, frankly, argument. And it really bothers me when people try to pull up depth charts. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah,
Fired up.
fired up. No, it just changes how you build your team. Like the nice thing is it's angering, but everyone is playing in the same game. All the managers in your league that are playing with these things are playing the same game. Sure, in most games, there's some amount of luck, or like getting lucky with certain
Yes.
things, but you're not alone in these fights, and often it comes down to like a lot of these singular players. But uh, as much as you think you're being targeted with player designations, your league mates are also being subject to similar things. So if you decide to play in one of these true position leagues, just kind of like what we say with all the league settings with the scoring, same thing with your roster management. If you're in a spot where one player going from a linebacker to defensive end completely breaks your entire roster, then you probably weren't planning adequately enough. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm sorry that sucks, but it happens. I that same breath. Yeah, I'd also be pissed the heck off as well.
Yeah.
So I'm with you there. But it's one of those things where we're playing a game. We're playing a game. We're all playing in the same rules. So unless your league manager is doing something manipulative and trying to purposefully screw you out of a specific build that you're trying to do, Uh,
Right.
I have a hard time getting super upset about it because we're all dealing with the same stuff.
Yeah.
So like yeah, have your roster build be a little more flexible. Uh
Mhm.
I think one of the important things that I believe in, which makes that sort of work, is make a decision early on in the season
Right.
of what that player's position eligibility is going to be, because you
Mhm.
can't go into August all of a sudden changing a linebacker to a defensive
Right.
end or
That
vice
hurts
versa.
even
Like
more.
you got to tell me now. You got to tell me
Mhm.
before the rookie draft. You have to tell me
Yeah.
before any free agency sort of opens up so I can adapt. And that's the
Totally
part that
agree.
I love about fantasy football, right? It's all
Mhm.
about adapting. If everything
Yeah.
worked out all the time, your 12 uh your 12 team league would have 12 champions, right? Because your build would always work. But that's not the game we're playing. So it's about adapting and fluctuating with the different inputs, right?
Yeah.
So this is just another one of those things that if you're a good manager, which you if you're listening to us, you definitely are. You have good advice.
Hell yeah.
You're gonna be able to make it through it.
Awesome. All right. Well, that was far too of an even keeled answer for
I
me.
know. That's it. I have this mustache now. So I feel like I need to be like a firefighter and just like douse any fires. Like we're okay. We're safe here. We're safe. It's gonna be okay.
Yes. So I think, yes, totally agree with everything you said. I would just add on, let's, try to use as much common sense also. But yes, establishing a system and a rule base for
Mhm.
position designations, I think is important too. Like, hey, if we're just going to leave it up to the platform, and it is what it is, establish that
You're
early
gonna have
on.
some pissed
Yeah.
off owners.
I would advocate to not do that. I would advocate to try to figure something out using snap counts, using a provider like PFF to, where they are probably do it the best as far as tracking where these guys are actually playing, um, and try to make some of these close calls using some actual data and information, not just clicks of people's fingers or clicks of a button on a website. Where someone was able to change something like that. And if you dig for that information, you can find it. Something we will be working on here over at IDP guys, coming in the future. We're going to help try to have some tools in place for you to help make some of those decisions. So yeah, so I think ultimately let's do final thoughts on this. To answer his question, why the heck won't we uh, support essentially true position? I don't think that's totally a fair or true statement. I think plenty of people do. For me, I think it really just comes down to skill level and interest level, determining that. So diehards, of course, we would advocate. I think for true position, I do think it provides a better overall experience and also exposes you to more players versus what I'll call the big three, of just the lumping it together by level of the defense. So, but I also enjoy that because there's different strategies that you can do, right? I think we're both playing some of the excuse me, the guys over at the IDP show, their best ball leagues, which are really fun, but they're all in sleeper. I love to hammer the dual eligible linebacker DL guys
The
super
cheat code.
early. Yeah, I hammer them. They're my favorite thing to do. That's my strategy. I punt on defensive back, and that's okay because I'm still going to load up later in the draft. I still need to know the players. I'm just not getting the elite top tier level guys at defensive back, and I'm okay with that because man, we talk about turnover of the top 12 and things like that. I think it's greatest at defensive back, just because of the sheer volume of players. And quarterbacks do end up being relevant. I think it's more fun to take chances on them in a best ball league than trying to, pick and choose matchups of when to start them in a quote unquote normal league. So I think we don't not support it. I think we're just trying to be more inclusive and I think it all just depends on skill level and interest level. So those are kind of my final thoughts.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I like the generic stuff when we can get new players talking
Mhm.
about IDP.
Mhm.
Again, I will speak from personal experience. I've
Mhm.
gotten all of the leagues that I am in, all of my redraft leagues. into IDP quite earnestly by pitching the generic settings. It's less of a burden to learn new things. It's earnestly less of a burden to set up if you're the league manager. It just gets the conversation going. I think the quote unquote level up, if we are going to go from Charmander to Charmeleon, right?
I love
All the way up to
this. I
Charizard,
love this analogy.
right?
Yes, keep
Like
going.
yes, that the the next level up is going with the true position. But
Right.
just like how Charizard got very hard to manage by Ash versus Charmander, with great power comes great responsibility. Once you make it more advanced, right, you have to be
Mhm,
more in the weeds with your league settings to make sure things are balanced, to
mhm.
make sure players are being put in the right uh positional designation.
Right.
Like there are more risks to doing it. I personally think there are more rewards, as everything we sort of mentioned.
Yeah.
There more players are relevant, it can be more
Mhm,
balanced. It's a richer experience
mhm.
than having a Pikachu that never ever grows up to be a Raichu, who's statistically better in all ways. We're not going to talk about that. But uh I'll speak for myself with the mustache, the firefighter mustache. We just want people playing IDP. So
Yes. Yeah.
whatever it takes to get you in there, to get you, lovely listener of this show, to convince your family league to
Mhm.
do it. Life's too short to get that upset about anything. Uh, but I certainly hope, with making this more mainstream and the various websites getting better at ranking these positions, getting a
Mhm,
better idea of who should be what, that we can get to a spot where, yes, much like tight ends and wide receivers being separate,
mhm.
cornerbacks and safeties can be separate, and
Right.
that is just what we do. Uh, so I know some of my leagues, they don't like the team defense, so the general people are saying
Mhm.
and they don't like kickers. Like, let's just get rid of kickers
Yeah.
and team defense. Let's just make it offensive
Smart.
only. And like that's equally upsetting to me, when there's an entire second half of the ball, right? So like it's like
Right.
no, don't get rid of team defense. Like, add a DL,
Replace them.
linebacker, and
Yeah.
safety, and then you're good. You're only dealing with three more people instead of the 7 to 11 that some of us kind of do. So,
Mhm.
yeah, my wrapping up thoughts are do what you need to do to get them in there. I will always be in support of people being in a league they are happy with. So, if you are in leagues in the IDP community, Fantasy Maestro, where they're not supporting those things, and you want to be in leagues that do support True Destination, I know of a million startups that are happening, and we can get you with
Mhm.
the people that you want to be with.
Exactly. And shout out to our guy, Big Mike Sicoli,
Big Mike?
chiming in there. Yes, positional rankings and projections becoming the norm. I think, yes, we are all striving for that. So
Yes, sir.
this is great. All right. We are planning to come to you next week with talking some rookies. So if you are still having rookie fever, have your rookie drafts coming up or startups, we are going to be doing our favorites and our fades at the different levels of the defense. Now we are going to be grouping by the three levels of the defense, but we're gonna talk some of our guys that we like and guys that we dislike. And we'll see who gets mad or passionate about some of that stuff. Probably gonna end up being me again, but we'll see.
I'll bring the heat. I'll bring the heat. And as always, if you have any questions you want to have answered, anything at all, please reach out to us. You can find us at IDP guys. That's at Dynasty Santa. I'm at mrecord21. We're here to answer all of your questions, whether it be on Twitter or through this podcast. Really, we want to be engaging with people who are just as passionate about IDP and just fantasy in general. So if you have those league setting up questions, or you're contemplating between, you know, the big three or true designation, just reach out. We'll help give you some advice. We've been around the block. We know some
Oh
things. You
yeah.
can take it or leave it. But we're here for you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.